Mountainhead is a 2025 satirical film released by HBO. It was written and directed by Jesse Armstrong and stars Steve Carell, Jason Schwartzman, Cory Michael Smith, and Rami Youssef. The plot of the film follows four tech oligarchs on a weekend retreat right after the release of a generative AI software that threatens the stability of the entire world order, as the line between reality and fiction is further blurred by bad actors using said software to stoke internal sectarian divisions and incite unrest across the entire world. In the beginning of the film, we are introduced to each of the oligarchs, and while each is kind of a mishmash of various tech oligarchs and pseudo-intellectuals that most of us should know from the current hellscape that is contemporary America, the two that are the most fleshed out in any discernible way is Randall, played by Steve Carell, who seems to be a collage of Steve Jobs, Curtis Yarvin, and to a lesser extent, Ray Kurzweil, Mark Andreessen, and even a little bit of Thomas Friedman. As such, Randall serves as the group's mentor and ideological core from which the remaining three oligarchs draw their inspirations in both life and business. Which, spoiler alert, that ideology that they draw from, it's just techno-fascism. Next there is Venis Parrish, played by Cory Michael Smith, who seems to be a mixture of both Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg. He's the owner of a social media company called Tram, which is spelled thusly. Tram is the company responsible for unleashing the generative AI suite that topples the world order. Like Zuckerberg, it is noted that Venis is also responsible for stoking a genocide, and much like Musk, Venis seems like his consciousness was only recently transported into a human body, and as such, he moves it with a lack of familiarity and discomfort that one can't help but question if he is an actual human being or something cosplaying as one. And I will note that Cory Michael Smith's performance as Venis is probably the strongest of the entire cast. Of the four, he goes the extra mile and precisely embodies the physical incompetence and socially maladaptive quirks and tics so often found in our modern-day tech oligarchs. Meanwhile, the remaining two oligarchs are less defined by any real-world analogs, but are rather representations of the lesser knowns of the industry who have been pushed aside or cast out of the tech world entirely because they're either lacking the business acumen or the sociopathic drive to thrive in such an unforgiving world. The first of these two is Hugo Van Yolk, played by Jason Schwartzman, the retreat's host and owner of the estate for which the film is named, the titular Mountainhead.
You know,
Mountainhead?
Yeah.
Oh, like Fountainhead, Mountainhead? Was your interior decorator Ein Bland?
While he is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, he is considerably poorer than the three other men in the group. Because of this, he is both known affectionately and derisively as Soup, Soups, or Super to the other oligarchs. These words themselves being truncated variations of the term soup kitchen. You know, because he is poor, at least by comparison, and, you know, that's where poor people go. You know, get it?
Legalize comedy! Yeah!
Much like all the venture capitalists that shape our public discourse in the modern world, Hugo's riches are implied to have been purely a stroke of luck, and like those VCs that are given too large of a megaphone in today's society, he overestimates his own intelligence, because, you know, he's rich. He made one right bet years ago, and because of how our system works and how our society is structured, he's been allowed to live a life of leisure and comfort. However, even with his hundreds of millions of dollars, he is plagued by an inferiority complex and is filled with some sense of self-loathing for not being able to achieve the billionaire status he feels so entitled to. And finally, we have Jeff Aberdazzi, played by Rami Youssef. As the only member of the group with remotely human feelings, which I'll admit is an exceedingly low bar given the company he keeps, he acts as a proxy for the audience and a foil to the other three oligarchs and their ambitions for world domination. And I mean that quite seriously. It's not hyperbole. These guys do want to take over the world. From the beginning of the film, we are introduced to a world not unlike our own that is already teetering on the edge and is only being made worse by social media. However, it isn't until the release of a new suite of AI tools do these things truly boil over. As the film plays out, various bad actors across several countries use these tools to generate inflammatory propaganda that destabilizes governments the entire world over by turning the world's population against itself. As the world around them falls into complete disarray, the film remains solely focused on the inner workings of what goes on behind the closed doors of the most powerful and privileged of spaces. The oligarchs, safely cloistered atop a mountain inside an opulent ski lodge, initially greet the end of the current world order with varying levels of indifference and amusement. However, the mood immediately turns to glee when the President of the United States reaches out to the men seeking to stifle all the discord resulting from the recent release of Tram's new AI tools. It's a revelatory moment for the men, who suddenly realize that they're far more powerful than any head of state on the face of the earth. The appeals from not only the President of the United States, but also various world governments is enough to send the oligarchs' aspirations of complete world domination into overdrive. No longer are they limply philosophizing about their utopian ideals on some podcast hosted by some overly credulous dum-dum who lacks the ability or desire to challenge their extremely stupid and extremely dangerous ideas. They are now presented a rare opportunity to shape the world in their image. While 3 of the 4 tech oligarchs are absolutely ecstatic to take advantage of the situation, going so far as to manipulate markets and energy infrastructure across the globe to lay the groundwork for a hostile takeover of the world's nations, including the United States of America, Jeff remains the sole holdout. As the CEO of an AI detection company called Builter, he alone has a key piece of technology that could easily render Tram's AI suite of tools impotent by accurately flagging anything built using AI as fake. In short, Jeff's AI detection software is a necessary component for the completion of the takeover. Randall, Venis, and Hugo need Jeff's cooperation, or, in the very least, need his software. However, in a moment of extreme candor, Jeff confides in Randall that he has no desire to rule the world, nor live in one that is radically different from the one he currently occupies, because the status quo offers him immense comfort, and he tries to remind Randall that this is true for him and the others as well. This causes Randall extreme distress, and immediately Randall begins to plot alongside Hugo and Venis to murder Jeff because Jeff is, in Randall's words, a decel or decelerationist. This makes Jeff an obstacle to the utopian future, and any obstacle to the future becomes an enemy worthy of extermination. From this point in the film, we follow the oligarchs and their bumbling attempts at murdering Jeff, culminating in one final encounter which finds Jeff locked in a sauna as Venis, Randall, and Hugo try to squeegee gasoline under the threshold of the door and threatening to set Jeff ablaze. Though before Jeff can be immolated, he makes a final plea for his life by offering his company, Builter, up for acquisition under very favorable terms. The oligarchs readily accept his deal, call up their respective legal teams, setting into motion the preliminaries for an acquisition that will doom the world to a techno-authoritarian hellscape with the 3 tech CEOs as its rulers. Yeah, it's a little bleak. As I stated at the top of this video, this movie was written and directed by Jesse Armstrong, whose most famous work to date is HBO's satirical boardroom drama, Succession. Like Succession, Mountainhead utilizes the same formula in terms of tone and aesthetic, from the naturalistic dialogue laced with wry witticisms and opaque jargon to the shaky handheld documentary-style camera work, and even right down to the tensions of a boardroom thriller replete with self-serious pseudo-intellectual ruminations of the elite that are draped in these muted, luxurious, casual attire that created that trend on the internet most of you may have recognized as being called stealth wealth. It easily could have been an episode of Succession, in all honesty. Had one of the Roy family shown up to discuss the implication of trans AI on the Royco Waystar portfolio with Venis, it wouldn't really have been out of place. One of the strengths of Jesse Armstrong's current work is his ability to create these characters whose wealth and status has disconnected them from their own humanity, and yet, through a serious flaw in how we structure our societies, have so much power over humans to the point that they're almost, in a way, Lovecraftian monsters. In both Succession and Mountainhead, there's an almost cosmic horror element that I don't feel gets enough attention. Because while the characters of these stories are just people with all the same flaws and motivations as the rest of us, they occupy a position in society where any attempt to satisfy some random whim or desire has way larger implications for the world around them. Case in point, Vin's release of the AI tools to boost the valuation of his company results in thousands, if not millions, of deaths and threatens the entire world order.
Are you people dumb? This has to fucking happen.
Yeah, you're always going to get some people dead.
Not to mention the general ecological cost of having AI itself. Venis just wanted to get rich and make something neat. He has no care for the implications of his own desires on the state of the world. And I know now you're thinking, I thought this was about tech oligarchs implementing techno-fascism. It is, but a large element within the film is deconstructing the motivating factors behind such aspirations, rather than just stopping at a kind of blanket explanation of they're doing it because, well, they're evil, you know? True, that's true, they are evil, but how do they arrive there? And I guess to try to answer this, I'm going to talk about each character separately and how they are introduced to the audience. From the beginning of the film, each character is shown to be undergoing some personal crisis before they even see each other on the titular Mountainhead estate. For Randall, this crisis comes in the form of sickness. When we're first introduced to him, he's shown speaking with a doctor in his private jet on his way to Mountainhead. We immediately learn that he has some sort of unnamed terminal illness. In short, Randall is dying and only has about 5 years to live. Faced with the prospect of his own mortality, he arrives at Mountainhead with an intense focus on reaching the singularity so that he can live forever on the internet as a digital post-human consciousness. Randall never discloses his condition to the other oligarchs, but his fixation to cheat death informs every decision in the film he makes. No matter how often he tries to pretend that everything he does in the film is in service to humanity or his greater philosophy.
I think that might be a misreading of Kant.
Oh, yeah? Because I take Kant really fucking seriously!
We can easily infer that his selfishness is disguised as altruism, not unlike the Silicon Valley philosophy of effective altruism. And I guess since I brought it up, effective altruism is more a justification for selfishness than it is any sort of philosophy or moral code. It's not really that much different from prosperity theology. There's really not much to it. It just says that it's morally virtuous to make as much money and acquire as much power as possible, because the only obstacle that you have to helping other people is that you don't have enough money or power. And I know this might not come as a shock to any of you listening, but adherents to effective altruism never achieve enough money or power to get around to actually helping people. So it's obviously just bullshit. However, this is just my limited understanding of effective altruism, and if you're an adherent to it and you think I mischaracterized your stupid scam philosophy, the best way to counter my argument would be to like, share, and comment on this video, while also subscribing to my channel. That would really put me in my place. Anyway, during a hike up one of the nearby mountains, Randall shows a genuine interest in the singularity when Venis mentions the prospect of post-human transcendence. That is, uploading one's consciousness to the internet. Or, well, a machine. Not necessarily have to be the internet. When asked about his estimates on when this future could be reached, Venis says it may be as long as 10 years, unless Jeff were to sell his company to him. Then, Venis says quite confidently, it could happen in as little as 5 years, which is perfect for Randall. It's within the window of time that he has left, or is quoted as having left by his doctor. This excites Randall, and remains a key factor in his decision-making for the remainder of the film. This is why Randall takes such great offense to Jeff's refusal to rule the world alongside the other three men. After all, Venis needs Jeff's AI to achieve the singularity, and therefore Randall needs Jeff's AI to achieve digital immortality. In effect, at least from Randall's perspective, this means that Jeff is killing him, and thus murdering Jeff would not only be for the greater good, but is actually a form of self-defense. Of the four men, Venis's motivations are probably the least compelling. As I stated earlier, he's mostly an Elon Musk analog with a spattering of Mark Zuckerberg. He espouses aspirations for space travel, further developing artificial intelligence, and eventually achieving the singularity by making the human consciousness digital, or so he says. Like Musk, the lofty promises of some near-future breakthrough that irrevocably changes the course of human history are merely a smokescreen to achieve his true desire, which is acquiring more money and power. In fact, his ownership of Tram is heavily intimated to stem more from his ruthlessness as a businessman rather than any ingenuity he may possess as an actual innovator within the space. This can be seen as one of the most transparent parallels to Musk and his hostile takeover of Tesla Motors. back when he pushed out the original founders, Mark Tarpenning and Martin Eberhard. And, as stated earlier when discussing Randall, Venis exhibits a keen awareness that his AI is not the best available. And, as such, he uses the retreat at Mountainhead as an opportunity to try and acquire Builter from Jeff so that he can integrate it into Tram's existing artificial intelligence infrastructure. And next up we have Hugo. When we first meet him, we see he's making phone calls and general preparations for hosting the weekend retreat at Mountainhead. In addition, we are shown a moment where Hugo seems to be rehearsing a sales pitch for his new quote-unquote lifestyle app. As I've stated earlier, Hugo is worth hundreds of millions, which for a normal person would be enough to just disappear and live a life of comfort. However, Hugo is not a normal person. His ambition is far outweighed by his own sense of entitlement. Unlike the other oligarchs, there are no real outside pressures that drive him. Of the four, his motivation is not actually rooted in any immediate crisis. He just wants to be richer because, well, he believes he deserves to be richer. This is actually what makes him an extremely dangerous person, because being richer will not make Hugo's life any more comfortable than it already is, and his inability to even appreciate that, it threatens to immiserate the entire world. Hugo represents one of the key pillars of support that allows fascist movements to prevail. Let me explain. So much of the propaganda around fascist movements and how they succeed, at least in the Western world, largely center on the disenfranchisement of the working class. That isn't to say that the alienation and dissatisfaction of the lower classes play no part at all, but only when those sentiments are harnessed for authoritarian movements like fascism is it always given this narrative in our pop culture and media that scapegoats the lower classes for the actual malice of the elite. While the foot soldiers for fascism will always come from the lower classes, they are only able to do so with the support of the elite. Take, for instance, anytime the working class advocates for itself and its own interests, they routinely get castigated in the media as being inauthentic agitators on the payroll of some shadowy cabal or foreign government. Or, in the very least, they are portrayed as being too economically illiterate to understand the supposed disastrous consequences of earning a living wage. However, whenever the poor and disenfranchised act in the interest of the ruling class by, say, violently enforcing an authoritarian ideology like fascism, there is always an attempt to either downplay or erase how much the elite not only benefit from such movements, but actively support them. For example, whenever Trumpism began to emerge in the run-up to the 2016 presidential election, so many news outlets saw it as a chance to blame the poor and disenfranchised for his rise. Did a lot of those people support him? Sure, he spoke to their frustrations in a way that no mainstream political party could, even if they were willing to. However, there was nothing in Donald Trump's history, platform, or social affiliations that would lead any normal thinking person to believe he was going to be some champion of the working class. After all, with hindsight, we already know that Trump has used both of his presidencies to transfer more and more wealth to the upper classes. And yet, media coverage about Trumpism is so often focused on this weird poverty safari or forgotten man angles that really only work to serve as cover by running interference for the elite and their wishes to reshape society. That's because the unfortunate state of modern journalism is that its ownership and even some who work within its ranks as journalists themselves either belong to the ruling class or run in the same social circles. Obviously, this presents a massive conflict of interest for most media outlets. After all, how objective can a journalist be when they're worried about offending someone who is friends with the person signing their paychecks? What's a journalist to do when they've cultivated a lot of sources from some of the world's most exclusive social circles? Does that journalist merely turn a blind eye to any and all indiscretions to maintain access, not only for professional reasons, but personal? Ideally, the answer to that last question would be no. But this would upend everything we understand and know about humans as social animals. In short, these movements never get any sustained momentum without it being co-signed by the upper classes. Hugo is a perfect stand-in for the actual engine of fascism. He is manipulating the moment for his own benefit because of his own insatiable greed and personal insecurities. After all, he already has a lot of money and power. He just wants more of it. And he is more than willing to stoke a revolution to acquire more. Nowhere is this most evident in the film than when we are shown that Hugo is actually in talks with rogue members of the Argentinian government, attempting to install a puppet regime. It's a small aside and has no real impact on the immediate events within the film, but it's an important detail to remind the audience that authoritarian movements never spring from the bottom up. Rather, they are given permission by the ruling elite, who seeks to use the chaos to expand their own power. And finally, this brings us to Jeff, the audience proxy and anti-hero of the film. And before I go further, I want to make it clear that Jeff is not a good person. He is not that mythical, good billionaire that liberals want so badly to exist. My greatest fear when anti-heroes arise within media and the people who consume it is there's this misassumption that the humanization of a character, no matter how odious, must mean that they deserve the sympathy of the audience. It doesn't mean that, and I think you're kind of actually stupid if you take that away from works of art that do this. It does allow us, as the audience, to understand their perspective and walk in their shoes, but it doesn't mean that we are required to agree with their positions or actions. Anyway, I don't necessarily know why I went through all that. Jeff isn't like the Joker or anything. For the most part, he just makes a lot of snide remarks to his fellow ultra-wealthy friends at their expense and refuses to sell his AI company to Venis. However, it's how he arrives at this point of opposition is what I'm more concerned with discussing. While all these actions to some degree may be seen as a benefit to the world that has just been thrown into chaos by some AI company, it's important to understand that when we first meet Jeff, he, like Randall, is flying on a private jet on his way to the retreat at Mountainhead. And like Randall, he is in the midst of processing bad news. However, his crisis point is far less dire. When we are introduced to him, we are shown that he has misgivings about his girlfriend attending a sex party in Mexico while he is away with his oligarch buddies. His girlfriend, Hester, played by Hadley Robinson, does reassure Jeff that her attendance at the party does not necessarily guarantee her participation in any of the activities for which the party is known. And it's unimportant to my analysis as to whether or not Hester is telling the truth here. What is important is how Hester's plans affect Jeff emotionally. Now, whether or not he is heartbroken or merely upset at the lack of control he has over Hester is up for debate. But I am more than willing to argue the latter. Because of the company Jeff keeps and his status as a billionaire, I have an extremely hard time believing he has normal human emotions or is even capable of feeling love. This doesn't mean that any emotions he does have are invalid. It just means that, depending on your perspective as a member of the audience, it is possible to walk away with differing interpretations for Jeff's actions and demeanor as the film progresses. That is to say, I don't personally think Jeff cares for Hester as much as he cares about losing something he feels ownership over. Hester's refusal to simply submit to Jeff's wishes is an obvious parallel to his own bitterness towards losing his ownership over Tram. He isn't defiant as a matter of principle, he is just being vindictive. One of the running gags in Mountainhead revolves around the gap between the billionaire's alleged knowledge and their actual demonstrated ability. For all their self-aggrandizing proclamations about their own superiority, they show very basic failures in planning and execution when it comes to Jeff's murder. Their existence as billionaires has not only allowed them lives of extreme comfort and luxury, but it has also blinded them to the very limitations of their own competence. They are beneficiaries of a severely inequitable, if not outright parasitic system that rewards people far more for simply telling other people what to do, rather than justly compensating the very people whose labor is responsible for realizing such demands. Because of such conditioning, the men are incapable of distinguishing between dictating labor and performing it. So, when they task themselves with murdering Jeff, they haven't the faintest clue as to how to actually accomplish this, because, let's face it, they don't really know how to do anything because they've grown so accustomed to having things done for them. Much like all their pontifications regarding the state of the world and how much better it will be under their benevolent rule, the oligarchs find themselves more interested in debating the best way to separate Jeff from his mortal coil, rather than actually doing the necessary work to achieve this goal. It isn't until the final attempt do the men seem to accept that they really don't have the actual skill nor will to actually kill Jeff. In the end, they murder Jeff in the only way they know how, and that's through the legal process. As I said earlier, Jeff's final plea for his life comes at a rather steep cost where he negotiates terms of Bilter's acquisition in favor of the men. Venis and Jeff immediately contact their legal teams to legitimize the acquisition, and just like that, the world is forever changed with a few strokes of a pen. But, that's how it always is. I'm not saying that this is a particularly deep observation. After all, we do have the expression, the pen is mightier than the sword and all that stuff, but I think it's important to keep at the top of your mind when watching the resolution of the film's events. So, at the same time that Jeff is losing Bilter, Venis also agrees to acquire Hugo's lifestyle app, finally bestowing onto Hugo that billionaire status that he's longed for this entire film. It's a wonderful illustration about the nature of wealth as a social phenomenon rather than the result of any natural byproduct of work or merit. Hugo becomes a billionaire because he happens to know a billionaire, and really that's all it takes. I don't even mean that sarcastically. It's actually very emblematic of our system as a whole, because nothing about wealth and its distribution is natural, it's political. None of what we are living with today in regards to income inequality and wage stagnation is an accident. It's the expected outcome of our public policy. Money is a shared public resource after all, and every dollar hoarded by a billionaire actually devalues the dollars that you have in your own possession. Billionaires know this, they like this, this is what they lobby politicians for. This is the expectation that they have for monetary policy. In almost every other facet of the human experience, we're pretty capable of identifying the adverse effects of greed or just general overconsumption. However, for whatever reason, in America at least, we're blinded by propaganda that says there's actually no cost to the limitless accumulation of capital. This is obviously a lie, because if you live in the United States of America, you know that the country has never been wealthier, yet, at the same time, less and less people can even afford to live here. So where is that money if it isn't going into the hands of its workers? Well, it's being siphoned upwards. If you understand what I'm saying, then you understand that billionaires exist because we let them exist. And we really should not. Well, that's it. Please like and subscribe if you made it this far. Or, thumbs down. I think interactions are neutral, just as long as you're interacting with the video. You may notice that I've had some audio issues on the past few videos. Apparently my mixer was on its last legs, but I got a new audio interface now, so hopefully those are done with now. Thanks. Bye.